everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today I'm going to be giving some horror recommendations and some horror advice for new readers of horror, but also this pertains to some maybe more experienced readers as well. Stay tuned. Okay everyone, before we begin I just want to say something. You'll notice on this video that I don't put any nice images up above me. That's because we've had a bit of a problem this morning. A power station, or substation, very close to us has exploded. So we are going to be without power indefinitely. And we basically use backups like inverters and a battery. And we don't want to spend too much time on this video so that the battery runs out. So we're not going to be doing too much editing, adding in images, because then you've got to do all sorts of stuff with your video afterwards, and that can sort of take up to 2 hours. So we're going to try and make this short and painless as possible. And on the positive side of that, at least I'll be able to cook some food over the fire, and that I have a Kindle with a backlight, so I'll be able to do some reading tonight, which is nice. Okay everyone, I've actually mentioned this on a previous video, but one piece of advice that I can give to newer readers of horror is to read lots and lots of short stories. Now, if you just feel like jumping into a massive novel, go ahead. I know that Stephen King is mentioned often, and I know people will say that the first horror book they've ever read is The Shining or It, but what if you don't enjoy the book and it's too long and it's too wordy and it puts you off horror for good? I would suggest you read short stories, and not just any short stories from the classic era, classic short stories and modern short stories. I would go with authors such as Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft. His novels are awesome, and then maybe if they really appeal to you, you could actually go up to Dracula as well. One of the benefits for beginners in the horror genre of reading classical short stories is that if you think you're a bit of a scaredy cat, you're going to get some very dark horror tales, but without the blood and gore that is so common in a lot of modern fiction. Like Edgar Allan Poe, it's macabre, there's almost a sense of dread and terror, but not so much blood is spilt, and so you can skip the gore, and that gives you a good indication of whether you enjoy horror or not. For more experienced readers that perhaps have not got themselves into classic horror, it's almost like a gateway. If you read a whole lot of smaller horror fiction, Lovecraft in particular, some of his novellas are awesome. Maybe you haven't brought yourself to reading Dracula yet. You don't like the writing style, you don't like the old classic literary style. It's a good idea to get into it slowly, dip your feet into classic fiction. Of course, there are also many examples of collections of modern fiction, short stories. I particularly love Stephen King's Skeleton Crew. I enjoy Neil Gaiman, Trigger Warnings. And if you're brave enough, Clive Barker, Books of Blood. For a beginner, it's great to read this because it gives you an idea of the horror genre. It gives you an idea of themes and tropes and subgenres, and you can figure out what you want. Because if you just tackle a huge book about a haunted house and you don't enjoy it, that might put you off horror for good. Whereas you read a whole lot of short stories, it just gives you an idea of the horror genre as a whole. For a more experienced reader, it's a good idea to read lots of different authors, because you might find a new author that you fall in love with. You read an excellent short story, for instance by Robert Bloch, and then that makes you want to read Psycho. So it's good for both beginner and experienced readers as well. Two of my favorite horror short story compilations are Dark Forces, and this has got awesome authors by the likes of Stephen King and other masters. Let me just have a look in here. Dennis Etchison, Robert Aikman, Joyce Carol Oates. So really, yeah, there's something for everyone in this particular one. I also love this book that I've had for quite a while, which is called 65 Great Spine Chillers. And there are lots of classic ones in here as well. But the point is, the more widely you read, and the more horror authors you read about, there's every chance that they might be writing longer stories as well. So you can get a real feel for different styles of writing, different types of storytelling, and there might be some that really appeal to you. I want to give you a personal example. I have really started to enjoy Joe R. Lansdale, and I was introduced to him by a novella called On the Far Side of the Cadillac Desert with Dead Folk, and after reading that novella I started picking up more and more of his works. That's my example. Okay, and another piece of advice and some more recommendations. You can ask yourself the question, if you're brand new to horror, what is your favorite genre? Do you love thrillers? Do you love fantasy? And I would say you can take those genres and find examples of horror in them, or sort of cross-genre pieces that maybe are thrillers, part horror, and give that a try before you really delve into other authors. I think a good example is Dean Koontz. Many consider him a horror author, but I think he writes more suspense thriller. And two books that I've read by him that I actually really enjoyed are The Bad Place by Dean Koontz and Watchers, which is an awesome read. So that's a good thing. Now, let's say you're into fantasy and you love your fantasy, but you want to read something darker. I would go with Clive Barker, The Great and Secret Show, also Reworld or Magica. Next up, let's say you love coming of age stories. I think the best example of that would be Robert McCammon Boy's Life, because although this is not a horror, there are horrific elements in the story. Finally, let's say you're into science fiction and fantasy and want to explore a bit of horror. Ray Bradbury might be the author for you, because he does a little bit of all three in the short stories that he writes. He's a magical writer. Another way to get into horror may be through Stephen King. I see a lot of people online that recommend him. He's a great storyteller, but remember, not everyone will enjoy his writing. I absolutely love him, but there may be some that actually are turned off by horror just because they've read a Stephen King book they don't like. If you insist on reading Stephen King, it might be a better idea to go for the shorter stuff, like his short stories, but maybe his shorter novels as well. Something like Kerry, which was his first published novel. And then you got The Long Walk, which he wrote when he was at university, surprisingly. And there's a number of short novellas or very short novels in different seasons. And it also includes some sort of non-horror writing, The Body, which was turned into Stand By Me. And there's a very, very terrifying story in here called Apt Pupil, which is absolutely brilliant. That is different seasons. And finally, an excellent way to get into horror is the obvious. Read some YA horror that appeals to both adults and teens. And there's some very good examples here that I have spoken about on this channel before, and that is Coraline by Neil Gaiman and The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. And of course I mentioned Aberrat by Clive Barker as well, because he's done some amazing YA novels as well as adult horror. Okay everyone, there we have it. That's my little video, short and sweet, on some recommendations, some advice for readers that are new to the horror genre. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment down in the spaces below and let me know what you think. And just a reminder, if I'm not here on Sunday, you know why. Power might be off for a long time after what's happened. But in the meantime, keep those pages turning, take care of yourselves, and cheers.